How do you make comics without all the frustration, without feeling lousy and inadequate all the time? Join me, Jess Ruliffson,
And me, Tom Hart.
on the Terrible Anvil. Each week, we build community and shift our mindset about what it means to make comics and art. We're working through the whole process, one piece at a time, turning our suffering and angst into fun and glee. Join us at sawcomics.org. Da, 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 da. It's the Terrible Anvil. I'm your host, Jess Ruliffson. I'm here with my fantastic co-host.
Tom Hart. Yes.
And also our silent note taker, Meg, also being amazing. You can't hear them, but they're here.
Yes.
Spiritually and physically or digitally. What are we talking about this week? We're talking about criticism. Just getting, Tom.
And rejection, or just
and rejection. Oh yes, let's go there. I randomly in my notes. So this is all in service of the Bootlegger's Guide to Comics, which I'm starting to get a little having a hard time finishing, or I've gotten to the end of like a very not attractive first draft and waiting anxiously for Tom's criticism, rejection, or feedback.
all three.
So maybe this is good timing. And then, but within that, I was also thinking about, it's just like a sidebar, but how deadlines, if you don't meet deadlines, it's sort of like a self-rejection. So like, but maybe the only way you can control rejection is by like not rejecting yourself and just trying to finish work. That seems to be a mantra of like a lot of our solutions are like, just finish stuff and you'll still feel bad, but you'll feel better. So talking about criticism, like how to deal with criticism. There's different types of criticism. I don't have categories off the top of my head, but certainly let's say useful and maybe less useful input from people outside of yourself. We have the inner critic, of course, but I think I'm more concerned about external criticism and how to be collaborative or not. And then rejection itself is maybe more of a long form collaboration where you're like, I'll show them, and then you continue, or you don't. I don't know. Yeah. So they're tough things, and maybe obstacles in our mind to why we don't want to make anything.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, I get it.
Are we allowed to talk about this? It feels like not a.
Well, I mean, our take on all of this. You know, we've covered a lot of ground that other creativity resources have talked about. So I want to make sure we don't spout the usual stuff, which is like everybody deals with rejection, and Stephen King has wallpapered his house with rejection letters, which is true. I mean, I think it's in his book, and but I think we go deeper than that. I think we go like deeper into like the just how it feels, you know, and just how weird it feels, and just how weird people are, and how much they do the things we wish they wouldn't do, regarding everything, but also criticism, rejection, and things like that. So we're going to get into the sort of like what do I want to say? Just this sort of like gooey details of, of criticism and rejection, and self and missing deadlines. Apparently, that's related too.
Yeah, and I feel like this is like the top of the episode is always like, here's where we're aiming to go.
Yeah.
And then also like caveats where we're like, well, I hope we don't talk too much about XYZ. And I also like, don't want to talk too much about like, I don't know, like Tom said, anything someone already said, we're going to try to say it better or not say it at all. And to be more specific, when Stephen King was first sending stuff out, he had a long nail above his desk, I think is what it was, and he would hang the rejection letters in a pile on the wall until they fell off, and they were That's what I remember. I haven't fact checked this at all. We don't have any fact checkers on our show because we're not that type of podcast. So adding more to the lore, but yeah. So and then there's there was a book that got printed that used to be a blog called Letters of Note, and famously would publish rejection letters. And it was always from someone amazing like Jim Henson or Einstein. It was like rejected flatly, like we don't want your stuff. So it can be somewhat encouraging to other creators to hear from creators like, oh man, I've been rejected too. So I want to normalize it, but I also feel like sometimes when I normalize like the bad stuff, I can sound a little Pollyanna-ish, as like Tom was kind of riffing on that a little bit, like it's okay, it happens to everybody. I don't know. Yeah, so like we're acknowledging the pain, but we're trying to figure out how to negotiate that and then maybe help it serve you a little bit better. I don't know.
But also we're updating some of that stuff a little bit too, right? Because all the examples you cited are gatekeeper level rejections, right? Like there are publishing houses, there are television networks, whatever, and they've got the keys in the form of yes or no, and they're giving out no's by the dozen. And we're not really talking about that as much as we're talking about the little, I imagine, the little things that might keep you just from doing the work, the little rejections, the little criticisms, and also the ones that are internal. And we're always encouraging people to self-publish, and sometimes things get in the way of that. And we want you to feel really, it comes down to, we want you to feel good about working, and we want you to feel good about the work. And sometimes things get in the way of that. And as a funny anecdote to start the topic, I'll just mention this offhand thing. I had a coffee with a stranger yesterday that I knew from some online communications, and we met and had a lovely time for about an hour, just having a conversation about the stuff that interests us both. And then really abruptly, about an hour in, she was like, well, I have to go. And we said goodbye, and it was like nice and stuff. And like ever since, I've been like, God, that felt so lousy. Like, what did I do wrong? I did everything wrong. I mean, probably the whole coffee. Oh, fuck. Like
Tom got like 90 minutes of sleep last night. He was just like staring at the ceiling, like, what happened?
And I'm just like, and it's just like these things just get into your brain, right? It's so funny how that can happen. And so I think that might be a good way, a good analog to something we may talk about later, or maybe not. But anyway, we have.
Sure. Yeah, I was like, oh God, I didn't even think about all those social interactions and trying to keep this to a minimum, but oh my God, yeah, overthinking those. Yeah, I don't know. Well, sometimes we get off this podcast and Tom and I will text each other, be like, that was good, right? Like, we're like, yeah, okay, it's happening. And sometimes we'll, listen to the episodes too, and we're like, oh, hey, this was pretty good, or oh, okay, because we're just in some type of like blackout fugue state when we record, I guess. But it is hard to assess your work as you're making it, let's say. So there's criticism or rejection afoot before, during, and after you make something. The famous rejection usually comes after you've like poured years and so many resources into something, and like you feel kind of okay about it and share it, and someone just is like flatly says, this isn't a good fit for our publishing house, and we're
Right.
cooler than you. And you're like, no.
Right. Oh, it's always about being.
All right, how do we get into it? Because I feel like I'm circling the airport, but I don't know how to land.
Oh, right.
You want to talk about criticism first?
Sure.
It's the opposite of compliments. I love compliments. I love giving compliments. I love Tom's shirt today. If you're just listening to this, he's wearing his famous cowboy shirt.
It's the same shirt. It's well, okay, so
every 3 weeks.
There's criticism that's invited and criticism that's not, right? And maybe when we've invited criticism, we know about what form it might take, or what, and how it might land. And hopefully, if we're pursuing an art form, we've learned to ask for it in a certain way, because we've learned to ask for it in a way that aligns with our goals. I'd like to get better at this. I'd like to get better at this. I want to know people are reaching, or that I'm reaching people. And so we ask for a certain kind of criticism. And that's an important skill to learn. The criticism that comes either uninvited, or is just kind of completely totally out of the blue, or from left field, because you invited it, but it came in a weird way or something. That's the stuff that really sticks, I think, sometimes. I know I can give 2 examples where I gave unwarranted criticism and I still feel bad about it. Well, although one, I feel like bad because I think I hurt somebody's feelings. I'll explain that one. And then another, I just realized I was wrong. And like, why did I say that? So the first example, actually the second example. So James Kochalka is a great cartoonist, and we've known each other for I don't know, 30 years or something. And but I was really into inventing the wheel over and over again, because I just thought there was so much to do in comics, and like you should just start from scratch and just invent this universe and just make a huge something really big every time and really exciting. And he was at the time making this comic with this character called Magic Boy. He looks like an elf. He's got some ears and stuff. And this was before email. I wrote him a letter. I was like, I really think continuing characters just aren't the way to go. And I really think you should start inventing new characters for new stories, because it's a new era, James. It was like, and I don't know what he wrote back. We're still friends, but it was just like, well, that's fine, but no. And I always lately, it was a couple years later that I realized, like, oh, continuing characters rock. And ever since then, it's been one of the things that's in my toolbox, which is, are the ideas I'm generating right now, do they belong to one of the characters I've already utilized before, or I've already have a relationship with, which is an even better way to phrase it, or not? And continuing characters are just one of these things. But because I was so haughty, I was like, James, you're doing it wrong.
10 years, we're gonna have a Terrible Anvil 2 sequel where we're like, we were wrong about everything. Redact. It's actually the opposite. Oh, that's good. So do you remember the first example you were thinking of?
The other example, I won't even mention the name of this person, because it was just unfair to them. But again, a letter. I wrote them a letter. I think it might have been right on the cusp of email days, and I gave them advice on their comics are very realistic and also autobiographical and pretty much diary driven, and I just gave them advice that I thought was good advice. And they wrote back and said, I just don't think you and I are trying to do the same thing. And I was like, oh, you're right. Shit, I'm sorry. And I still see their work these days, and I still feel the same way, that like I'd rather they do this instead of what they're doing, because they're close, but it's not for me to say. So I feel bad about that. Like, and they were right about that. I mean, so I had to learn the hard way, like, oh, what does giving criticism mean? I don't give it unasked for anymore. Those are the only 2 times I can significantly think of it, because I'm also very vulnerable to it too, right? If somebody if somebody reads my book and hands it back to me and says, boy, you blah, blah, and just says something that's critical about it, I'd be hurt. And I'd think about it forever. So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah, anytime I try to teach my graphic novel in an in-person class, you could hear a mouse fart, like no one contributes anything. I was just like, well, I guess I can tell you how I ended up just like talking about process, because no one wants to talk about the content. And it's kind of a bummer read, so that's fair. But like I also wonder if they're afraid, they're like, this professor has control of my final grade for this course, and I have a certain GPA in mind for when I'd like to graduate. So I am not going to say anything about the comic that they made. And I invite them, like lay it on me. It's just like they don't go there. And maybe I'm happy about that secretly. Yeah, and it's funny, like if it's criticism about something you're still working on and it's from a collaborator, that's different from like, oh, I posted a story that got published in the Washington Post, and now there's a comment section, or I finished a graphic novel and I can go on Goodreads and hear what people really think about it. I know Tom mentioned Goodreads as like our sort of pre-episode brainstorm, but I brought up the Washington Post piece I did a couple weeks ago because my husband just asked me a couple nights ago. He was like, "Did you read the comment section of your Washington Post piece?" I said, "No." Clutches. What are they saying? And he was like, and it really wasn't that bad. It sounded like someone like, I didn't read it. I wasn't tempted to go there. It's a big reason I'm not on social media, is I don't have the skin for it. But he said they were saying something like, oh, it's a comic now, kind of like this is a serious news story, and why would you draw a comic about it? So I was like, oh, that's just someone like who doesn't understand like what might be available in this medium, and they sound like somebody who spends a lot of time in the comments.
True, right.
So it's like, oh, that's so it's funny because I also don't have skin for scary movies, and if my husband, he's always watching something scary, he'll watch it, and I'll kind of peek in and be like, ooh, that looks a little scary, and then he'll get up to get a snack in the the kitchen a little while later, and I'll have him give me a recap of what is happening plot wise, because I want to know, but I don't want to know any of the gore. And he's like, yeah, okay, well, this guy got decapitated, and I don't know, this other zombie showed up. I'm like, oh, oh, really? Oh, is that other guy still alive? Oh, that's cool. All right, see you later. Like, so I kind of have like a working knowledge of like the zombie show with Pedro Pascal that came out a couple of years ago, only through like the 1800s Pony Express version. But like got the message in the kitchen from my husband. So that was also a nice way to receive some criticism, was like to have it filtered through someone else and then be like decide for myself like, oh, I don't really need to pay attention to that. Yeah, so criticism, I actually have grown to like a little bit more when I'm working on a piece and it's from a group of people that I respect. I chuckle because like you can't always pick the group of criticizers if you're in a class or something like that. But with the freelance stuff, that's maybe also true. But I've been lucky that the group of editors we're working with the Boston Globe have been critical, but in like a helpful way, where they're concerned about the logistics of reading the piece in a vertical scrolling format, and then also just the legibility of medical terms. Which, so like if they're like, can you make this a little more elaborate? Sometimes my husband's like, do we really need another explainer on this medical thing? Like it's more interesting if you like figure it out via context, because you can understand the story. You don't need like a Wikipedia definition, but they're fond of those. So I think yeah, you do have to strike a balance. But it's not this criticism of like your writing sucks or your drawing sucks. Like I don't think my partner's writing is bad, but sometimes my drawing is not what I want it to be. But no, so far no, they haven't said anything about that. They just like, oh, you're missing a punctuation there. I'm like, oh, thanks. So that's not even really criticism. I guess it's just line edits. But it can be like in the same ballpark, a little scary to show people your stuff while you're working on it. And maybe the criticism after something is difficult. If I'm receiving criticism that I'm generally having trouble with emotionally, and I'm trying to buy myself some time, but also trying to get a little less angry about being criticized, I'll say something like, "That's interesting. Can you tell me a little more about that?" Like I get them to like,
That means,
if they just keep talking, then I'm like, oh, okay, like I get a little less angry about it. Do you do stuff? Is that a coping mechanism? I should ask my therapist. Tom, what do you do?
are you saying, are you saying that if I hear those words from you, that means you're still inside and
No.
are very angry?
No, no, genuinely, like I use that phrase a lot when I'm like, I don't know what's going on and I want to buy myself some time. I'm like, tell me more about that because I genuinely keep talking. That sounds great. Tom, tell me more about that.
Well, I've mentioned often that I keep a lot of my work private for this reason. But again, I feel like a lot of what I do is out in the open, but not my art, you know? So like Saw is very visible. I'm accountable to everybody who comes in here. I have active, overly active family life, which keeps me busy, and everybody wants things done a certain way. So like my my comics and my music, they're the places that I sort of don't welcome criticism. Like, but I've also set up my life so that I'm not working with editors right now. I'm not doing things commercially, and I'm just noodling around. Um, if I were to sort of like develop something a little farther, I would have a couple people. You'd be on that list, Jess, and Lauren Weinstein would be on. Yeah, and you know Lauren Weinstein is very trusted. I think she gets, and and I'd be like, hey, how's this working? And then I would listen. You know, Lauren's great though because Lauren is kind of wacky, and like if I give her something wacky, she literally one of the last times I did this, she was like, I literally don't know what's going on, but I love it. And like that was exactly what I wanted to hear. Not like I don't know what's going on and you got to make it make sense. So anyway, but no, it's partially having a thin skin, but it's also partially just what do I want out of art, and a lot of that is that sort of intimate, personal relationship. You know, just very personal, just very private. So I don't deal with it much. When I have, I've had at least memoir, one book get out there in a big way. And my editor there was very hands off. Gave me a couple instances where he was like, I'm not really sure what's going on in this panel, and more often than not, he was right. But there's only like two or three instances of that. Jason Little, one of my friends, was one of my close readers for that book, and there were a couple instances where he was like, I don't really get what you're saying here, and I left it in, especially for one thing, and I left it in. But every time I reread it, I think like, this confused Jason. I wonder if other people. I still feel like it was.
Yeah.
Well, I still left it believing it was the right thing. It was just this weird, confusing metaphor I was making. Um, so I left that in. But to go back to Goodreads and things, like when that book came out, there was like, I made the mistake, everyone should know. Don't read the reviews. Don't read what people say on anything. Just don't. And like there was just it was just one comment from one person, and luckily, what is it like? It's 8 years later. I've mostly forgotten the comment by now, but it took a good 5 years to forget the words. But it was something like, I've read this topic done much more effectively and intensely with this in this particular book, and I don't see what's so great about this one, mine. And I remember like, oh, and I looked that other book up, and I was like, it was really obscure, and I was like, but then I was like, oh, I didn't do a good job, and I just felt that way for 5 years, or even still. For one, and like all the other reviews on Goodreads were extremely positive, but it's better off to.
The bad ones are bad. They're like farts, you know. You're like, oh, that one's
Yeah.
a really bad one. You're like, ooh, unforgettable. Yeah, I'm dealing with more, well, yeah, criticism, yeah. Sometimes we self-criticize or we're very um what's the word, self-depreciating as a sort of protection and armor against criticism. Like not only will I not share my work with other people, but I'll step in and tell you how bad it is. So
Sure.
share it all. And that happens a lot with like students of comics that are sharing in a group that might be like a little more self-conscious about whatever skill, either drawing or writing. It's usually drawing or writing. They're like, oh, I know this is a hot mess. And then it's also funny as I see cartoonists submit final work for an anthology or something, and they'd be like, oh, here are all the things I didn't have time to edit. I'm like, no one noticed.
Yeah.
We're all like, okay. I mean, so if you can get stuff out the door, like if you can get past yourself and out the door and put your work out there, I feel like if you can do that, sometimes you can handle criticism from other people. It's been a while since I've like heard any criticism on my work, and I think that's because I'm not on social media. I only collaborate with like the same two editors. I'm married to the person I'm collaborating with, so we have to be civil to a degree if we want to like continue living together. So like I feel like I've hemmed in like good boundaries for myself and
Right.
like and I think when you're starting out in the medium, I was gonna say younger, but you don't necessarily have to be
Mhm.
spiritually or chronologically younger. But when you're starting out in something like comics, for example, you might feel really self-conscious and you might want voices around you. You might want a little bit of criticism and encouragement. A lot of times I get criticized from certain students to be like, man, you're not very tough. Like I thought like I would get this workshop experience and the teacher who's a kind of gatekeeper would tell me how to do it right. Sometimes I do, but I'd rather be like critical on a feedback level for like, this is how you can make this a little more clear, or here are the pitfalls if you decide to tell a story this way, that you can continue telling it the way you're telling it, but here's what I think. But it's always like optional. Like I don't think it's as constructive to say like this is what you should do. But that is a criticism. Sometimes I'm like, wow, this is really great. And everyone's like, oh, I kind of wanted you to be meaner. But I know what it's like to
Look
be
at
at the
that.
receiving end of like volatile feedback, and like I'm like I know I won't go there, but like maybe it's a balance.
So so you so students want you to be a little tougher with more strict.
Depends, but I think generally some of the time that's true in like more of a like a skills-based class or something that we might have at SAW, or anytime, sometimes it happens towards the end of the graphic novel intensive. We have students that are already coming in that already have something kind of started or have been living with an idea for a long period of time. So I think they want someone, it's like going into a haunted house. You want someone to leap out and be like, ah! So like they know what they're signing up for. They're going into the graphic novel intensive haunted house and they want me to leap out and scare them, but I'm like, hey, are you doing okay? Like it's not part of the contract that they signed up for, I guess. So sometimes you can negotiate, and I like that Tom opened up the episode saying, oh, ask for it, ask for criticism, which sounds psychotic, but because we're like, oh my God, Goodreads, but you can ask for the criticism you want, and sometimes that's even better if you can, for example, post to the Mighty Network we're on and say, hey, here's a thing I did. You can post for free in the public feed, but sometimes it makes it less awkward waiting around for likes. You could write something like, oh, I'm really curious what you might think about the flow or what the character design is like, or I had a lot of fun doing XYZ. Does anyone else use that watercolor brush I love? Like it's kind of like a more conversational, so you can ask for criticism or banter or like anyone else do XYZ. That can be really helpful because sometimes you feel like you're the only person that's thinking something or working through something wherever you're at. Um, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, I had a student early when I started teaching, it's 2001 or two or something at the School of Visual Arts. So college age student, and he came in with something that was uh, pornographic and not good. Now, you have to be really careful, I think, in using words like good and bad in art school and when talking about people's art. And I tried my best with this kid, and I tried to talk about what pornography was, and if he wanted to make it what its values tend to be, and like what it's trying to do for a viewer, and he just kept saying, well, who says what art is? And I was like, all right, look, I'm just telling you it sucks, man. Eventually I just lost it. I was like, but he was really pulling that like, who gets to say what's art? And
Right.
I totally believe that is a really valid point of view, except when you're in a particular art school, in a particular class, in a particular program. In which case, we often go back to this: what are the guiding principles we've set up? Why are we here? Why are we in this classroom? We're here to learn this. We're here to learn communication. We're not here to be like, I'm just making my art, man. We're here to learn how to communicate, how to tell a story, and
Right.
and understand, some of the strictures of genre, if that's where we're going, and things like that. And but all I was getting from him was like, who gets to say what's art? And I just told
You're
him,
like, I
yeah,
do.
well, I just
Because
thought
you're
it was
paying me to. You're literally paying me to be here. So
yeah. So I don't know, I just thought it was ugly porn, and I just want, anyway. So
no, that's good. Sometimes I'll say like I have students present on comics at the end of the semester in my in-person program. They get to pick a comic to add to the syllabus. I was like, you can pick anything you want. It could be young adult. It can be really off the rails. It can be webcomic. I don't really have any rules for genre, and there's a lot of genres that are underrepresented in our class because it's just not long enough. So they usually have a really good time. But I was like, caveat, like if you include something that has like a lot of violence or a lot of sexually explicit imagery, you might run the risk of alienating certain people in the classroom,
mhm.
and you just don't know where people are at. So like I think like if you can show other images that are a little more neutral from the work and mention that there is content like that, or you can say, hey, heads up, I'm going to show you this thing and it's a little spicy or something like that. I was like, I think that just brings more people into the conversation. So I kind of frame it that way versus like, I'm not the gatekeeper exactly, but you narrow the focus of your available audience when you like draw a line in the sand like that, when you're like, oh, it's just whatever, it's just art and I'm going to make it as graphic as I want to or something like that, without consideration of an audience. Yeah, it's a sort of weird, like the audience kind of has a right to be critical, I guess, if you're making it, but like I don't know if we necessarily like have to receive the criticism. I
Yeah, well,
don't know.
yeah, well, I mean, once you're dealing with an audience, that's a different thing, and different audiences will have different reactions based on what they wanted. And if they wanted a certain kind of story and didn't get it, or they wanted a certain kind of drawing and didn't get it, um, then they're going to be unhappy. And but you as a creator might have had different goals. It's just like what I told that one creator when I gave them a hard time, whose name I haven't mentioned, even though I keep almost mentioning it.
And they're like, our goals are just different, man. We're
Right.
just doing different things. You're like, fair, true. Also,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. I'm sorry. I should have kept my mouth shut. It wasn't right. I like that you, and I sort of want to go back there for a moment. I like that twice you've equated criticism with either jump scares in a haunted house or horror movies in general. I really like that. And I like that you said, like, in the graphic novel intensive, you think some people might be in there for like a haunted house. Ever give me a jump scare, that's a great
I think they're
metaphor.
going on like the cool vintage roller coaster, and then they're like, "Oh, this thing kind of sucks." Hopefully, man, I'm really the graphic novel intensive is enrolling now and starting in just a month. Please join us for the. Is that a
but
good plug? I
but
promise it's not as bad as all that. Go
but
ahead, Tom.
no, 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 no. We're always looking for ways to sort of improve how we talk about making graphic novels in that program and everywhere. And like, I love the idea of like maybe bringing that metaphor in. Like, if you want some jump scares, here, here's the place. We have a certain place for like, and then that's when we say, oh man, that hand is really drawn badly, which is
Yeah.
our default thing to talk about. Um,
I just want to say that personal growth through painful experiences is somewhat overrated. And you can decide it's gonna happen anyway, but like if you can titrate that, like if you're like, I'm not really in, May just started and I got a lot going on. I'm not really in the market for a lot of criticism, so maybe I won't be posting my work or working with a lot of other people. Like I like to keep it VIP,
VIP. But let's go back to the internal criticism and also just the sheer negativity coming at us from the rest of the world, like if one, I know, if somebody is going to say like, I'm not going to be posting much because I don't want to deal with the criticism, they've already probably, I've been in that position a million times. They've already probably got a pretty strong inner critic. And again, I'm going to bring up the fact we're not at the capitalism point yet, but I am at the sort of the world is a flame part. So,
A precursor to capitalism.
right. But there's just so much negativity in the world right now, and so many things oppressing everybody. Some more than others, but um, and so we have to, as creators, we have to be able to say like, this stands apart from that, and it's not a place where I'm going to let that kind of thing in, or I I can handle both. I can handle the world being on fire, and I can handle somebody giving me some advice about my comic. But you just have to know. You just have to know in advance. Um, but that inner, yeah. You want to go? You want to talk about the inner critic, which everyone talks about these days. I feel like certain things. I feel like certain things are invisible for a little while, and then everybody's talking about them. I felt that way. I swear, this is going to sound so bogus to just about everybody, but I was in a bar. This was like 20 years ago. And I was like, I just feel like sometimes when you're looking at like a drawing or an animation or some sort of computer rendition of a person, and it's just like close enough, but it's not close enough. And it just makes me feel all weird. And this was like a bar. And so people were like, yeah. And then another person said, there's a word for that. And then we were all like, what, really? And then the other person said, yeah, it's called the uncanny valley. I was like, oh. And then like 10 years, and then everybody's talking about the uncanny valley. And I feel like I was at the edge of talking about that. So I feel that way about the inner critic too. It's like everybody talks about the inner critic. But I feel
Yeah,
like
I don't.
we identified it early on, but I'm sure I'm wrong.
Yeah, I feel like I go to therapy enough that I don't really find find my inner critic as interesting as external ones. Like I feel like when I'm talking to a friend or my therapist about like how to negotiate something I find difficult, I'm usually complaining about a person outside of
Hmm.
my head.
Hmm.
But occasionally the call is coming from inside the
Right.
house. It is
Right.
me. It's me, like Taylor Swift
Right.
says. So yeah, sometimes you can realize that I find that my inner critic is quite sneaky and a lot of times I think I'm ignoring my inner critic, and I'm not. I'm just being really avoidant, and I found ways to like not. It's almost like I'm avoiding confrontations with my inner critic, but they
That's
still.
amazing. That I think that's the only successful method. How do you do it?
I don't know. Well, I don't know if I heard this metaphor from you or someone else that it's like rather than letting the inner critic drive the car, and this might even be, I think this is like a post from the graphic novel intensive that's now on the bootleggers guide to comics draft, but instead of letting the inner critic drive the car, and they're probably going over the speed limit and making you nervous with their driving. As someone who doesn't drive and I'm always in the passenger seat, I feel like this metaphor is crafted of my own doing. But anyway, instead of having them drive the car, maybe you're driving the car and they're in the back seat, so you can still see them. You're like a cab driver. You're doing the meaningful eye contact in the rearview mirror, and they can't touch a radio. They can be like, "Oh, this song sucks. Can you turn it down?" Or "I'm hot." They can whine or whatever, but they're in the back seat. So, but they can point stuff out like, "Oh, we missed the exit," or that looks cool, like, and you're on a road trip together, but you have to like give them a little less power. Maybe they can sit up front if they're behaving. Uh, but yeah, I don't feel like anyone drives any better if the passenger is like screaming at them, like you didn't do it right, you didn't know how I would do it or whatever. So yeah, trying to don't let them drive the car.
But
Even if you're
that's
not very good at driving, don't
but
let
I
them.
mean, a lot of us. It sounds like you have a different inner critic than a lot of us. I have a louder one, frankly. And I think it may. It almost certainly relates to how often, how vigorously um, you were told no growing up or becoming a young artist or anything, right? How often the doors were closed, how often it was very vocal, how often how what kind of language was used, what kind of tone was used. And so we all have these sort of like we've absorbed all of that, and it comes out and it becomes, it doesn't come out, it stays in, it becomes our inner critic. And I think mine's a lot louder than that. So mine, I don't think I can tell it to stay in the back seat, but what I can do is swerve around a lot so that I just keep it in the back seat from sheer
Velocity.
chaos. Yeah.
Like all
So,
scrambled around. Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm working on a new comic and I can't get started. And I like open up the file and I started drawing today. And I was like, should I draw on paper again because the drawing's not right? I was like, let me just draw it. And I'm just drawing like butt today. Maybe I'm mumbling when I pray, but when I said I wanted to draw butts, I didn't mean I wanted to draw like butt. Like I'm not drawing well today. And I don't like, I know that to be true. Like I don't know. I guess I don't feel like that's the inner critic trolling me. I feel like we're both like hanging our heads like, damn, this is not very good. Like even my inner critic doesn't have much to say because we're both like, yeah, this is not very good. So but I'm living in that space and I'm hopeful like I'm gonna keep having a couple sessions where it's not going well, and then I'll figure something out. I get a photo reference, because you got to keep doing it, even if it's not going well. I think maybe you don't, but for this, I have a deadline. I'd like to be accountable, because otherwise, I'll feel worse.
I do think you have a unique inner critic, since we're talking about that. It seems like you've got this. It seems like your inner critic is no longer surprised and it's kind of bored. Like, yeah, Jess is doing that Jess thing again, right? And you guys just find some equilibrium where where it gets, I don't know, where it gets like, yeah, it gets quiet out of boredom.
I think that's the joy of like getting to know someone really intimately, even if you don't like them. It's like, oh, I can tell they've had a few glasses of wine, like so like, oh, there's my inner critic again, and she's been
Mm.
drinking. I'm like, oh yeah, there she comes. Like she's always on time, and know where to find her. Like it's never, I had never have to go looking for my inner critic, let's say. So if that's something you can count on, the same way that I can count on my mediocre drawing skills. I'm like, oh, drawing great today. Well, let's keep making this really not so good. Like, I think being a little less surprised by it takes the edge off. It doesn't, it doesn't really prevent it from, making it hard, but I think it takes a little bit of the edge off. Like, why does this feel so bad? Well, it does sometimes. Or, man,
Uh,
this really sucks. It's like, yeah, like I think just normalizing it not going well is before anyone else can. Is
yeah,
maybe a coping mechanism, but it helps a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. There's uh, I think you quoted Peter Elbow, who wrote that book, Writing Without Teachers. I think you quoted that in the book you're working on, and I think there's a point where he says he encourages the wrong ideas in the wrong words, and he says something like it's too much to demand that you get both of those things right at the same time. And so what you just said about like knowing that it's going wrong for a while is part of the process, and that's, and you know, I'm sort of exaggerating when I say I have that hard of a time with the inner critic, because I've gotten so used to the process of knowing when it's going badly, it's actually going okay.
Yeah, it becomes like
Well,
sort of diagnostic. Like you're like, I don't want
mhm,
it to stay crappy. So
right.
like we gotta, it's like you gotta drive through this scary part of town, I guess. You're like,
And again, in all these like revisions to my own creative process that I've been tweaking for years, and I'm trying to, and you know, I've took a year off to do music, and now I'm trying to get back into. All of it is to like sort of like stake out a process where the inner critic is welcomed at decent intervals, and it's harder for me, I think, than other people, and that's why I'm having such a hard time figuring out what I want to do. Other people have different relationships with it. You brought up Lauren Groff, who like um, writes an entire draft, throws it in a filing cabinet, and doesn't even think about it a second time. I don't know what she's thinking the second time she writes a draft, but clearly she's got her intervals paced, right? I mean, she's got her sort of like when things are going badly and when things are going well, she's accustomed to a certain kind of process, and that's sort of what you have to get used to. Is like I told one student, this was, she's been a board member at SAW and stuff. She's a great friend, but her name's Deanna, and this was a long time ago, and I was giving her some lessons or something, and she said, "Oh, I just got all these voices that just tell me to change this and do that," and and um, and apparently I didn't remember saying this, and she said to me, "You gave me the greatest advice." I said, "I did?" And she said, "Yeah, you said tell that voice it's not time yet." And I was like, "Oh shit, I got to start writing this stuff down." And that literally was one of the first points in my teaching career where I was like, I have to start like knowing the things to repeat, because like I can't keep inventing the things I believe every time, and I still do. Like I still kind of like don't ever fall into a greatest hits with when it comes to, to but that was a real wake up moment. So I was like, I kind of, that totally sounds like me, but I don't remember saying it. So like I better have a better relationship with my own like memory and like if I'm actually going to serve people as a teacher, I need to sort of remember some of the things I
have some isms. Well, you
say.
remember some of it. I mean, well, and the other thing is, if your memory's not so good, you just repeat yourself a lot, which is almost the same good as remembering something, saying it
Yeah, I
again.
don't know if I do or not, but
I repeat myself like I am a goldfish. It's fine. Yeah, it's not time yet is also what I tell my cat because she's always lurking by her food bowl. She's like, "What time?" And I was like, "No, it's like no time for food."
is
Um,
okay. Wait, let's keep going. Let's spend 60 seconds on that metaphor. Is a cat pooping a metaphor for the inner critic? Yes or no? Does that work?
um, well, my cat is very critical of everything I do, not related to feeding her. I don't know about her bathroom habits in relation to criticism.
Yeah, so maybe not. So it's not
Not a perfect
necessarily.
metaphor, but I love the
It's not.
attempt.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
I'm rejecting. I'm criticizing your metaphor, Tom. I'm
I
borderline
just,
rejecting.
I
Can
just,
we talk
but it
about
was worth
rejection?
exploring, right? It was worth
Yeah,
finishing
yeah.
that
We finished
thought
the thought, and
and
we
evaluating it, right? Which is what the critical mind should do. So
yeah.
now we can say, hey, you know, hey, critical mind in the back seat. I'm going to make this left and then this right, and then you tell me if we're at the right spot. And the critic will look around. Nope, we're not at Madison Square
I
Garden.
wonder if
Again.
like in the places where you can leave us comments for Terrible Anvil, like Substack, will there be a bunch of comment trolls this week that are like, "You guys suck, play Freebird," like will we
Okay.
get a lot of trolls? I hope so. And then they'll be like, "Actually, I've been lying awake at night thinking about Tom's idea about this cat box metaphor, and I have a lot to share. So feel free to tell us." I wanted to talk about rejection. Have you
Mhm.
heard about it? Um,
Oh yeah, we haven't really covered that much. Go
It's
ahead.
it's sort of like criticism, but what I feel like might be worse. It's like a really I just wrote the word no over and over in my notes. No, 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 no. As like a descriptor. I only have one little anecdote on rejection. I continually apply for like fancy or non-adjunct in-person teaching gigs, and I'll forget about them. And most of the time I don't hear anything, but every once in a while I'll get a form letter that says, "Dear applicant, we were floored by your materials. Unfortunately, we've gone with another candidate." I even got a rejection letter that didn't explicitly say they rejected me. They were just like, "Our search has concluded." I was like, okay, I guess you didn't pick me. So it like didn't even have the heart to reject me. So I've gotten kind of fluent with rejection letters, and since college, I've been applying for grants and things like that, and trying to get stuff published and all that stuff. So I started saving, like Stephen King, when I found out that he was saving his rejection letters, I started saving these rejection emails. And then a few years ago, I taught a high school class, a creative writing class, and I told the high schoolers to write their own rejection letter. And they said that was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard. They're like, why would I reject myself in the third person? I don't want to call that negative energy onto my life. No, like they just flat out rejected my proposal to write a rejection letter. And I told Tom about it. And he's like, oh, that's fair.
Yeah, I think I'm with them actually.
Reasonable. Yeah, that's totally reasonable. But yeah, I think I was giving them some like cool thought exercise where I'm like, it was more, we also wrote artist statements, so you're like writing about your accomplishments. But I just thought, oh, these guys are high schoolers. They're gonna be like really good kings and queens of roasting people. I bet they would write really good rejection letters, but they were like, no, because the examples are also like very clinical too, like dear so and so. It's always a form letter. I get it. They have a lot of applications, most of these things. So I get that they can't write a personal rejection. Sometimes you get a personal rejection letter, and that's why you save it if the person calls you by your name and
Mm.
they say, we read your story and here's a detail I remember of it, and it just didn't quite fit because things just didn't work out. But keep writing and send me the next thing you're working on. I have heard of things happening like that to other people. That hasn't happened to me. All of mine are AI generated rejection letters. But I wanted to talk about, yeah, the experience of rejection and whether or not that like can be positive or negative. Right now I'm just in the like self-pitying phase, but I know sometimes I'm like, I'll show them. Um
Oh, I'll show them is, I mean, I've talked with my friend Tim.
Classic.
Yeah, well, our mutual friend Tim Kreider, who I've lamented many, lots of the creative process with, but we both acknowledge that that's the main reason we are doing what we're doing is to show people, mostly in junior high and high school, like I'll show those effers, it's like, feeling so rejected for so long and so underappreciated, but believing in yourself, which is a lucky thing to do, right? We're not all gifted that, but we just moved into early adulthood saying, I'll show them. And that's what kept us going for maybe, I would say, in all honesty, I probably moved out of that phase in the last 10 years tops. That mostly I've been motivated by I'll show them. And I
Sarah
think,
had a good comment in the there's been a lot of great comments also, by the way. Lots of good ones I didn't get to share. So thanks for
yeah,
posting them.
yeah, please.
Sarah said, if you're more scared of success than obscurity, then the possibility of rejection sometimes is quite comforting because if you do
Mm.
get through, it means someone else is putting their reputation on the line to vouch for you, and you don't have to take full responsibility for inflicting your work on the world. Yeah, I'll often use that. Like if I get criticism from an art director, I'm like, well, they're the fools that hired me. If they don't like it, you knew what you were getting when you signed up with me, baby. Yeah, that's good. There was something else. I don't know if it's going to be applicable, but I wanted to roll the tape. Um, Nancy said something earlier that I liked. Nancy said the world is scary and negative enough. I just gently need to know how to improve when we were talking about like how to get asking for criticism in a maybe workshop environment. So thanks for that. Yeah, so rejection. So I guess we're having like revenge vendetta fueled years where we're like, I'll show them. What if I don't know if hmm I don't know if I had the same middle school experience. I don't think I translated my negative middle school experience as like a call to arms. I
Mm.
think I was just like, I'll continue existing and keep drawing, I guess. Uh, but I think the older I get, the more I'm irritated by rejection. I'm like, look, I'm old now. Like I not old, but like I have a website. Like I made a book. Like I'm very fancy. Like why are these people rejecting me? Like they're all fools.
you know, I mean, I'll continue. I'm very afraid of rejection. I mean, the main reason I started this school is like nobody's going to hire me, you know. No, I'm not one of the cool kids. No one likes me, you know, all these things. And I've done my best because the one thing I do know is that I've, for whatever reason, I have this enormous store of energy. Like I always want to change things. Um, but I never felt like the few rejections I've had, or the many I've lost count, they just hit too hard. And I believe, I wanted in to whatever I was applying to, or trying, you know,
Yeah,
in a
same.
way, just trying to be part of the cool kids, or actually trying to be part of an organization or whatever. Um, that um, that eventually I stopped trying, and I just keep forming my own way, which is why in our graphic novel program, for instance, I'm always the one saying, don't submit to a publisher, self promote, self publish. I mean, and but that's also because I really think, now this is the capitalism part, because I really think
Yay.
I really think we have the ability to create our own audiences, our own community, our own sense of welcoming. However, capitalism really makes that hard because there's so much money in a couple different places and not a lot of money elsewhere. Um, uh, but really, all we're saying is um, are the things I'm doing creatively, artistically, do they matter? Are they welcome? And I'm really am trying to create a world where the answer is always yes to that, even if it's not.
I could ask the same questions of the criticism I'm getting. Does it matter? And is it welcome? And they're like, get out. You're not welcome to
Yeah, right, right.
criticism. No one
Well,
asked you.
criticism is my art, you know. So yeah, now I get a little, that would throw me. That would be like, oh, that is a conundrum. So wait, if their criticism is their art, and I want to make a place where everybody's art is welcome, oh shit, and then I would just like, I would
You have a
short
troll
circuit.
corner. You're like, just for the trolls.
Right,
You guys
right.
have
You
a
get
good
that
time,
corner.
but you're only allowed, just boundaries. It's all about boundaries. Everybody gets a hangout spot, but not as far away from
Yeah.
you as possible.
See, I would have short circuited, but that's the right answer. That's why it's good to keep good people around, smarter than you. Um, I've got a I've got a method. I forgot that I made a whole inner critic. I don't want to get away from rejection if we're still working on it, but I had a whole inner critic course on the Saw Network, and I forgot that one of the methods was that I have you interview your inner critic, or it might be vice versa. You um, oh no, the inner critic interviews you, right? And so
If I interviewed my interview critic, I'd be like, why are you such a jerk?
right. So it's the
Have you
opposite.
always been a jerk?
Let the inner critic interview you, except there's one important parameter in which in that the inner critic's questions always have to be neutral, and and because the inner critic likes rules, you know. So if you say no, that's not right, you're speaking its language. If you're saying that's not right, you didn't ask that question right, ask it another time, another way. um it actually, at least mine does, it responds well. So if you don't mind, I'll read this really fast and it's
Just
sort
did
of
it, Tom.
way out. Okay, so this is my interview. I did it in 2021. um this is the lead, the inner critic is leading the question. So here is the, and I'll do deep voice for inner critic.
Okay, cool.
All right. I see that you, oh wait, sorry. I see that you've been making comics for 25 years now. Yes, that's right. I see that your stories tend to be about angry guys in holes or junkyards. Very observant, inner critic. I have all those feels, and I know getting them out there makes me feel better. I only share the ones that I think make some sense. I also do stories about people who are determined to be happy and are easily won over. Have you noticed those? Yes, those will probably win you more friends. Do more of those. I think the evidence has shown that honesty and vulnerability is better for my mental health than trying to do what other people say. What else have you observed about my technique? I notice you are still cross-hatching. That is a very out-of-date style. Yes, I really enjoy the feel and the sound a pen makes on paper, and I like turning something traditional like cross-hatching into my own personal form of marks. Have you noticed? Yes. I think you should draw more leaves. Those are realistic. People like realistic drawings. Yes, I have a hard time with foliage. I'm glad you noticed. I could use your help in finding good antecedents for foliage so I don't fall in the same shortcuts. Do you have a recommendation for drawing rocks? Yes, let's find lots of pictures of rocks and draw from them. Draw from photos to get better, but don't show anyone the drawings. They'll see you struggle a lot with your drawings. I don't mind if people see my struggles on the page. In fact, you gave me an idea. A comic called My Struggles with Landscapes, and it will be a guy walking around a landscape, which keeps changing how it's drawn and what it looks like. Thanks, critic. Will you help me with that? I'd really like help exploring lots and lots of different techniques. I don't know. I'm getting confused. I noticed. That's okay. Take a back seat. There's Jess's metaphor. Take a back seat, and when we're done, you can see what we can fix up and polish, and then help with the packaging. Okay, we should go camping.
Oh,
So that's what I
yay.
wrote.
Oh my God, Tom, you going camping with your inner critic would be the best comic ever.
That's what I wrote 3 years ago. I didn't remember
That's
any.
so good. I like that your inner critic sounds like Dwight Schrute from The Office and AI. And also like the ransom phone voice. Bring me the money in a suitcase.
But that's a good exercise. I should do that
So
again. I
good.
actually
Oh
forgot
man.
about that comic idea. That's a great
You know
idea
what?
we came up with
Yeah.
together.
Yeah, the bee is dying is kind of like a ode to landscapes, right? And like
Well,
getting
that was in the middle of Bees Dying, so like I was certainly in the middle of that. But this idea of the landscape changing, and anyway, whatever. We don't need
that's
to
so
talk.
good. Your inner critic actually sounds like a cool guy. I like if he's available to read some. Does he ever come
No,
out?
no, he's mostly a jerk, but
Uh,
he just knew that he had
if
to
you ever give me
respond to it.
unsolicited criticism and I'm like not into it, I'd be like, oh, Tom, that must have been your inner critic. Like,
Right.
what's what? Your outer critic.
You're
That's
out of
awesome. I don't.
it.
I'll try that. I don't know what my. I don't know if I could have a civil conversation with my inner critic, honestly. But I should dig up that exercise.
Um, okay, so are
Should we
we?
call it? Are we done?
Yeah, yeah, maybe. The one thing I didn't mention though is that, and it's building on what we've already talked a lot about, but like the particulars sometimes of the voices we've heard in the past, they really do stick with us, and it's really hard to get out of. Back in the early days of the internet, back when it was all forums and things like that, like somebody called me a man child in a comment or something, and I still, it's not as bad now, but I still hear it. I'm like, oh man, I'm just doing man child stuff, just like that guy said. And so it's tricky. Sometimes you just gotta stay out of the way of people.
Maybe it's okay. Like maybe what if everything everyone says about us is true, which can't really be real, but like so
But who
what?
cares?
Who cares? No one cares. I did have like an art director came to like one of my senior art classes at fancy art school and was like, your work's pretty, but it's just not saying anything. So I guess I do have a revenge vendetta and that I like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, did you see my piece in the Washington Post about prisons?
Right, 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 right.
Wow.
Yeah,
And to
exactly.
the point where now I've overcorrected and the trolls in the comments are like, I don't know, this is kind of a serious issue. Why would you draw a comic about it? I'm like, you can't keep everybody happy. So
Right, right. But that
so
actually
you
that
should
article.
print a business card that says Tom Hart, overgrown man child, available for making comics. Like,
No, no, exciting.
no, no.
No, but that now we're going over, but that art school thing shuts down a lot of people, and I can't believe we
Yeah,
didn't talk about it because a lot of people come to Saw and they say,
all survivors of it. Yeah.
yeah, and it's a really, 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 really sucky, unfortunate thing, and I hate it. And even Leela, my wife, she spent years not painting because of a painting instructor she had at school, and the criticism, like, your art's pretty but it's not saying anything, is valid so long as the teacher and the student are on the same page about what they're talking about and about why they're here. And and if you don't get to that shared space, then those words don't mean anything, and it just hurts.
Yeah,
It's
it's hard.
tricky. It's tricky.
I think I have a harder time with rejection now. Like when I was younger, it still sucked and it was hard to deal with. But I think in the back of my head, I was like, well, I'm still figuring it out. Like there's still time to figure it out, even if I don't have it. But the older I get, the more I'm like, damn, maybe I do suck. Like I've been doing the same thing for a long time, and some of the time it goes really well, and like other times, like it's just a lot of rejection letters in my inbox. I'm like, that's hard to that's hard to deal with because I
That's
think
capitalism, because
yeah, and it's related to capitalism
we
and
give you
expectations where I'm like I have to be at this certain level
we give
of
you yeah, yeah. Well, it's not a certain level. That's capitalism's not about a certain level. It's about there's a pool of money and a bunch of gatekeepers around it, and you just haven't met the right one, and it's just hellish. We give you what quote well you're talking about rejection letters. We give you welcome letters constantly, but we don't matter as much because we don't have as much money.
yeah, I know. It's like yeah, what we notice. It's funny, and I do think rejection letters just stand out more. But I will say that's not entirely true because there are times when I say or do something and Tom and other people I saw, sometimes it's even the students, they're like, "Oh my gosh, what you said was really intelligent." And I'm laughing because I'm like, "It was?" The way that Tom's like, "I said that." So it's nice to be appreciated. Like I definitely feel that, but I'm always a little startled. I'm like, "Oh, really? Oh, that's useful. Oh, that's really good. I'm happy to hear it." So surround yourself with people who understand your vibe and your worth
That's important.
and that you can you can receive and give criticism. Like
Yeah.
not everyone's going to be available for it. Tom's always mentioning Tim Kreider. We love him. I feel like he's read everyone's manuscript. If you're a cartoonist or a writer, he's probably read your manuscript. He's like so generous. So like, yeah, find the people that are generous that want to see the best of you and like are a little more helpful than your inner critic, I guess is the takeaway. Criticism.
Yeah, that's
My
great. And we're getting a lot of stories in the chat, and we can continue this conversation in the Mighty Network or in the comments of the post. But a lot of art school stories too. We could have kept this. Oh wow! Wow, did you read what Nancy said? I mean,
What Nancy say? Oh, Nancy has the best story.
the faculty at my art school was told to back off on critiques in January because too many students were attempting suicide.
Uh,
Oh my God.
yeah.
And Sarah says, my med school came with a free psychologist, and I think art schools might need it more. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Oh,
And
that's fair. Yeah.
yeah, um, absolutely, genuine art schools should have mental health facilities.
I don't assign fun home in the spring semester because February in the Northeast is already depressing enough.
You
So
only, only in the summer.
yeah, it's more of a beach read. Yeah, I'll make like trauma memoirs or my beach reads for the summer class.
All
All
right.
right.
What's next month? What's next week? I mean,
So next week, believe it or not, we're still here. We're doing it again. We're gonna get up to 20, and then I promise we'll leave you all alone. But the next episode is episode 17. I'm titling it Medium Rare. We're gonna talk about what medium you work in, traditional comics materials, new digital tools, Procreate. I know nothing about, but Tom knows a little bit. What medium you work in feels gratifying or satisfying? What's really labor intensive that might feel good or feel bad, or like are you like me and you're struggling to open Procreate even though you bought it 6 years ago? So like how medium might influence your work and when to pay attention to it or like what's your go-to medium. So very briefly,
awesome.
medium.
I'm excited by that topic. I'm worried you're going to need a guest host for the color episode. A guest host.
Why?
I can't talk about
You
that.
can be like, here are all the things I don't know about color, and I will sprinkle answers. It'll be a Q&A. You can be
Okay.
my
Okay.
inner critic.
We'll do it that way, and that'll be in a couple of weeks. Okay, so thanks to everybody for a really invigorating exploration into some of these things. Thanks for everybody who contributed in the chat, and I hope you'll contribute on either the comments page of the recap or on the Substack or wherever we also have places. Thanks for being here, and thanks for getting over whatever you've had to get over to be here, because that.
And thanks for not criticizing us in the comments.
I haven't been reading them all. I don't read the comments anymore. I mean,
I read the chat. So someone says
the chat, I read the comments. I don't read.
It's like live comments. So like, thank y'all for being collaborative and generous with our shenanigans. We really appreciate it.
All right, Jess. I'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, Bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us. This has been a production of the Sequential Artists Workshop, or SAW. You can find us on social media at Comics Workshop and online at sawcomics.org. You can hear about our many courses at learn.sawcomics.org. SAW is a nonprofit and supported by people like you. Learn how to make a tax-deductible donation at the donate page of sawcomics.org. You can join our free community of comics explorers at members.sawcomics.org. Thanks so much for being here.